Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. To the point that you were making earlier, Kim, though, I agree that I think the Zelensky complaint about the things that Trump is saying and the things that J.D. Vance is saying is that this is not what the art of the deal looks like. When you get into some kind of negotiation, you start by asking for more than you think you can get at the bargaining table. And the party that looks most desperate for a deal is the party that does not have the upper hand in a negotiation. And Donald Trump knows that. Donald Trump knows that from his business dealings, his real estate dealings. And so I think the Zelensky argument is, why are you out there making this kind of public pitch that I'm going to force these guys to the table? That even if you believe that the final conclusion to this conflict, this war, this invasion by Russia is going to be some kind of negotiated settlement, which I think both political parties probably agree is just the facts on the ground. You don't go around saying that I'm going to cut this deal, it will be so easy. You want to negotiate from a position of strength. And so that's the complaint, I think, on the Trump side, even though, again, to Kim's point, it seems like it's bad U.S. politics and bad geopolitics for a foreign leader to come over here to the United States and say that. Kate, what about the future on the Biden side? If we have Kamala Harris, who wins this presidential election in November, it seems to me that we know where President Biden stands, even if we can criticize his administration for being slow with this aid, always being a day late with the kind of munitions that Ukraine says it needs to push back these Russian advances. Yet he has been standing pretty steadfastly with the Ukrainian defenders. And what about Kamala Harris? Do we have any sense of what a Harris administration Ukraine policy would look like? Because, if you're looking at the presidential election, whether you're an American voter or whether you're the president of Ukraine, it's hard to see it as anything but a coin flip to me.
Yeah, you mentioned Biden has been so much rhetorically better on Ukraine, and he has done quite a bit to help them, and I take those points. But there is this really large gap between the things that they say about Ukraine and then the things that they do. And I want to raise one more story this week that I think really illustrates that, which is that earlier this year, when Congress passed the funding for Ukraine, the additional security assistance, Congress, and driven by Republicans in Congress, stipulated that the Biden administration needed to submit to Congress a strategy about how they were going to prevail in Ukraine, about what the longer-term aims were, including what kind of weapons Ukraine would need and how long they would expect some of these aims to take, and really articulate a larger theory of what victory looks like. Because you have Biden, who's willing to say that he wants Ukraine to win, which Trump is a little bit more hesitant to say, but then you look more closely at their underlying policies and they start to look a lot more similar between Trump and Biden, which is that they don't really want to do what it takes for Ukraine to win. So I mentioned that strategy document because we heard from some Republicans in Congress this week that the Biden administration finally submitted it. It was overdue, but the administration fully classified that document, even though Congress had asked for a unclassified strategy that the public could debate and digest. And I know this is a little inside baseball in Congress, but I do think Republicans were right to drive this debate about what is the larger picture of victory in Ukraine, how does the Biden administration see it, and also open those assumptions up to voters who want to know. I think polling is pretty clear that Americans don't want Putin to prevail in Ukraine, but Biden is not filling in to prevent that outcome. So I think this late classified ask again later strategy document really is another illustration of where the Biden administration is, which is just not where they say that they are in speeches. And you asked about Kamala, since that is the major question mark now. And I think we can expect her to kind of continue a policy that would maintain that gulf between rhetoric. She said this week that some want Ukraine to surrender. And I would be sympathetic with what she's saying if she had included an underlying plan about how she was going to accomplish it. So I think you could see more of the same muddle from a Harris administration. But eventually, if Russia continues to mobilize more reserves, if it continues to spend more and more on its defense and re-up some of its ammunition supplies, I mean, that can't go on forever. So I think there is as much risk of capitulation in a Harris administration as there is in a Trump administration, which is getting a lot more attention.
Kim, what's your sense of this? And maybe part of the answer is that we just don't know, and part of it may depend on who the advisors and the staff and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense are that Kamala Harris ends up appointing, because there are a lot of influence in those advisory positions, in those cabinet positions. And honestly, I don't know who's on the list.
Yeah. By the way, I think that that's the case for both campaigns. I think that the way Trump will handle foreign affairs will also be highly influenced by those he has around him. It's why when and if he is elected, look to see, I'd feel much better if you saw a Mike Pompeo at the Defense Department or a Tom Cotton. That would certainly signal one direction versus somebody who's more of the J.D. Vance persuasion. Same thing for Kamala Harris. Here's what we do know about her. She's unlikely to break in many ways from the broad Biden approach to the world, which has been do anything to not have any escalation, even though hilariously that's resulted in all kinds of oppressors and dictators around the world escalating all over the place. So this sort of appeasement strategy, multilateralism, leading in some areas from behind, much like Obama, I think that's the broad view. How she would deal with things on a specific basis, that's actually the great unknown. And by the way, I think it's one of the scariest aspects of the blank hole that is Kamala Harris and what she would be, because the position of commander-in-chief is the biggest test, right? It's the most important question of judgment and competence, because you have to make decisions sometimes on your own unilaterally without discussion with Congress and in a way that can affect many lives. How does she handle that 3 a.m. phone call? We don't know, because she hasn't talked a lot on this issue. We haven't seen her in action. We've had exactly one debate that barely touched on any of this, and she's done almost no interviews. And she evaded all primaries and caucuses. So it really is a bit of a mystery, and I think the scariest mystery of this campaign.
Thank you, Kim and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.